Welcome. This is the first module on speaking with impact. Speaking with impact, as you may have estimated, is actually about how you present yourself during a address, which could be a one-on-one address. It could be you speaking to a group of people, or it could be a large audience. The style that you may adopt for different audiences may vary, but speaking with impact is about bringing a certain degree of perfection to how you sound. Now, I want to put this out right away that if you have errors in your language, which means that there are grammatical issues, there is sentence structure issues, and overall comprehension of meaning issues, then that's not something that we would be in a position to cover. So what is this particular type of program going to cover then? The only things that we will be in a position to address in speaking with impact are areas of pronunciation, consonant correction, vowels, and the correction of the vowels, the right usages and the turns and the twists of the vowels as English tends to present it. We will also be addressing word endings, inflection, contours of speech. We would be looking at your ability to manage your rate of speech depending on the occasion and, of course, the type of audience that you have with you. An ability to have a sufficient amount of interest created in your audience when you speak. And this interest would obviously depend on the content, which is one part of it. And second is, how was the content delivered again? As I said a few minutes earlier, we're not going to take a lot of the what's here. We're going to do more of the hows. Now, I want to put this out there right up front that if your English is really weak, which means that the fundamental basics of the language and its comprehension has not really happened, then it means going through a grammar class, and that's not what this is going to be about. We're looking at trying to make the learning really speedy for those people who kind of have a hang of the language, but they have not mastered communication using the right phonetics, using the right ability to create stress points, which create interest in the listener. So if you want better intent and impact, yes, that's what this should be in a position to deliver for you. Having said all this and setting your expectations right, I would now want to spend a little time on a subject called philology. So what is philology? Philology is basically the study of a language, its origins, its influences, the other languages that might be connected to the language. So now, since we're going to be talking about philology of English, this particular first opening is for you to understand the language that you're trying to master. Okay, so English is something that a lot of us have learned from school, from our teachers, and from people who said that they spoke well, but not necessary that all of us had the benefit of learning the language from people who got their own phonetics right. I was extremely fortunate that my mother was absolutely insane about this language, and she is a literature graduate, of course, but I also come from a family of people who are fanatic about phonetics. So with this early training, I kind of got all my sounds and my pronunciations cleared up, and then over time I started doing a lot of research on my own and moved on to teaching the subject to people. Now, I want you to understand, therefore, that in a country like India, it is not very common for schools to have covered this subject. So if you are not good at this, I don't want you to beat yourself over the subject that, you know what, I didn't really learn this so well. Well, you couldn't have if your education system didn't factor this in, right? Which is exactly what we're trying to address now. I want you to also comprehend one thing, that if you are in your early years of education, and I call that up to about 23, then your ability to pick this up is going to be much faster. The other kind of people who are very strong at picking up language once they've understood things are people who have a very keen sense of listening. So if your listening skills are strong, and your comprehension is equally good, that means you learning ability is equal to learning agility, the speed at which you will learn. If this is high, if this is strong, then you might make faster progress than those who have to do it by rote or by repeats. Now, English is not our first language in India. I think everybody here speaks another language. So from the north, you will have Punjabi, you would have Bihari, or you have Rajasthani. In the center, you have Maharashtra, or you have Assamese and Bengali, and so on and so forth. In the south, you have like a lot of Dravidian languages, as they are called, because it kind of related to each other intensely. The commonality of all Indian languages is that their original base is Sanskrit. Sanskritam, as what it was called, is the base mother tongue, from which a lot of other languages have cropped up. Tamil begs to differ and say that no, they've always existed before. Now, I'm not going to go out and why or contest on that one, but Tamil is an old language, an incredibly old language. So Sanskrit is estimated to be about 6,000 years old, and there are a few who argue and say it's not really 6,000, it's far, far older than that. But the documentation work on Sanskritam actually happened about roughly 2,500, 3,000 years ago. So for a long time, a long period of time, it was more of a verbal language that was delivering education through gurukulams in India. Now, did Sanskrit really influence the world? The answer is yes. And this is the reason why I decided to talk about it at a time when we're talking about English. So English is a language, the way you see it today, kind of refined itself roughly about 1,000 years ago, but there is an older form of English called Old English, which is about 1,600 years old. And to a very large extent, this came from Germany. So the origins of the English that we speak is actually Germany. And the Anglo-Saxons carried the language with them to Great Britain long time ago during their period of migration. And the other languages that have influenced English is Greek and Latin to a very large extent, and Sanskrit, of course. So you have a combination of primarily four languages that contributed to English. All said, the English language is kind of tough for people who don't understand or speak the language as a native language, because there is no mathematical formula per se. A certain word could be pronounced a certain way, in the English language, and then you would have a similar sounding word pronounced completely differently. Like, for instance, we're talking about quarantine. But while that's quarantine, it's not Valentine, although when you pronounce them, you think logically it should have been the same. Pigeon, why wasn't it pigeon? Because that's how the spelling is. So the spelling does not necessarily indicate the pronunciation, which is one of the reasons why people grapple with this language, and they kind of end up scratching their head saying that it's a little hard to get around it. What I'm going to do, therefore, is to show you how it's going to be easier for you to break the words by syllables and then find the stress, which possibly would help you get your pronunciations right. We are going to go through this particular subject step by step. Today, our focus was to understand that English is a combination of several other languages, of which Sanskrit is one of them, which makes it easier for Indians to pick up the language. So if you've ever wondered why Indians have picked up English so well, is because of its familiarity, also, or the way that the words are constructed. It's easier for an Indian to pronounce them than for a lot of other people around the world. Like the Chinese still find it hard, and people in the Far East, of course, they find it hard, and so do people in the Middle East, but not so the Indians. The other thing that might be of interest for you is that English as a language came to the world through colonization. So while we criticize colonization quite a bit, if you had to look at the positives, it gave the world one language to communicate in, which is today the language of businesses. And maybe the geographical conditions would continue to provide everybody individual cultural identities, but the fact that we have common language now to do business in has definitely made markets more friendly and businesses to boom. So do we have much to thank English for? I think the answer is yes. And for those of you who want to do well at work, who want to succeed professionally, because this is the language in which we do most of our business in, and it's the language in which you talk to people across the geographies as well. You would want to work on your efficiencies, and one of the best ways to get this done is to start looking at the stuff that you may have missed in primary school. You're going to have to give up your shyness, because if you retain sense of awkwardness, you're not going to make too much progress. So travel with me. Thank you.